Hello world, a ransomware insurance company have themselves been attacked with ransomware. Apple's FindMyiPhone feature has been hacked. How you can potentially stop ransomware dead in its tracks with this one simple trick. The new Apple Airtag has been jailbroken, and bogus vaccine certificates overtake the dodgy vaccines for sale on the dark web. That's in today's episode of The Week Web, where we break down and dissect cybersecurity related tech news. A ransomware insurance company has been hit with a ransomware attack. Ironic. The victim here, AXA Insurance, had roughly 3 terabytes of data, including customers' medical records, passport scans, and a myriad of other things, encrypted, as well as stolen by the cybercrime group Avadan. In addition to holding them up for ransom, Avadan has seemingly started DDoSing AXA's company website. Avadan did say back in January that they would initiate DDoS attacks against their victims if they didn't come to the negotiating table and pay up. DDoS attacks don't cost cybercriminals a whole lot to carry out, a few $100s at most. Given typical ransomware demands are a few $100,000 at least, shelling out for a DDoS attack on a victim acts as a bit of encouragement for them to pay the ransom and is probably worth the investment on the part of the criminals, especially when DDoS attacks themselves cause a ton of damage in lost business on their own. We don't know how much money has been demanded from AXA, and their public statements to the media really aren't all that interesting. They said they've set up a dedicated task force to deal with the incident, etc, etc, but there's no acknowledgement of the irony and comedy inherent in this situation. Not so for those that have had their medical records stolen though. Interestingly, this ransomware attack comes just days after AXA themselves pledged to stop providing ransomware insurance to companies. Could this be some kind of retribution on the part of Avadan? After all, ransomware insurance is often seen as one of the great enablers of ransomware becoming such an issue. Ransomware insurance typically covers the fee of the ransom itself, along with costs associated to restoring data, as well as business interruption. There's no word on whether AXA is going to pay the ransom. I wonder, does a ransomware insurance company have ransomware insurance? Apple's FindMyiPhone service has been hacked. This story is actually really quite interesting. You see, pretty much all Apple devices work with the Find My network. Idea being, if your iPhone, iPad, MacBook, or AirTag gets lost or stolen, you can report the device as lost via the Find My app. Then Apple will use their network of over 1.5 billion Apple devices out there in the wild to find your lost device. The lost AirTag, for example, will transmit Bluetooth beacons to other nearby Apple products owned by random passers-by. When another Apple device picks up these beacons, it'll transmit them to Apple, which in turn pings you the location of where your lost gadget is. So this effectively uses everyone's Apple products as a kind of lost property network. Well, now it's been hacked to provide unlimited upload of arbitrary data to Apple's servers, which can then be downloaded. Using the researchers' open source tool on an ESP32 development board, you can emulate an AirTag and send any data using the Find My network. This is a big deal because it provides a method of extracting data from environments without internet access, anonymously. According to the researcher who developed this, Apple has done a really good job of privacy here, meaning Apple can't read the data sent by the lost device, and Apple doesn't even know which AirTags belong to your Apple ID. Also, Apple doesn't even have access to the decryption keys, only you do. One use case of this project could include exfiltrating data from air-gapped systems. If an attacker managed to breach a network using a malicious USB stick, for instance, and wanted to remotely retrieve data, this could potentially be an option if the network itself doesn't have internet access. A major caveat here though is that you can only exfiltrate 3 bytes a second. That's a pretty big downside. A more realistic use case of this could be using the Find My network to transmit data from IoT devices. The source code is publicly available and it looks fairly simple to get working. I'll make sure to link it in the description. The researcher has said it'd be quite difficult for Apple to defend against this type of misuse because of the level of inbuilt privacy and security in the system. With this one simple trick, you can potentially protect your computer from ransomware, and no, I'm not about to sell you some antivirus software. The idea is kind of genius, and I got it from krebsonsecurity.com. When we hear of ransomware in the news, a lot of the time it tends to originate from Russia. Why that is debatable. Some say the Russian government is turning a blind eye to cybercriminals, or even protecting them. Whether this is true or just politics, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter here. The point is, Russian authorities will usually only initiate a cyber cybercrime investigation against a Russian citizen if a report is filed by a company or individual that lives in Russia. So in order for cybercriminals to protect themselves from the law, Russian ransomware often runs a language check. If the ransomware detects that a Russian language pack is installed, it'll usually just assume the computer is based in Russia, nope out, and delete itself instead of encrypting the victim's files and demanding Bitcoin. This doesn't mean you need to learn Russian and change the default language of your computer. You just need to have the Russian language pack installed, and that'll probably be enough. Will this protect you 100% from ransomware? Of course not, but I've covered various ransomware attacks on this channel before and have seen instances where code samples show language checks hidden within Russian ransomware code, so I reckon this is probably worth doing. It doesn't cost you anything and only takes up a few megabytes. On Windows, just head over to Language Settings, tap Add Language, search for Russian, hit Install, and you're done. Before the next topic, if you like hearing about cybersecurity news, tips and tricks, do make sure to let me know by hitting like and turn on those sub notifications so you're notified as soon as new episodes go live. The Airtag has been successfully hacked. Just a couple of weeks after its launch, Stack Smashing on YouTube managed to successfully modify the firmware of an Airtag and program a little surprise into it. Airtags use the same Bluetooth chip as many Bluetooth development boards, one of the NRF family of chips. The chip in the Airtag comes locked down by Apple, meaning the ability to retrieve the firmware from the device is disabled. However, by using a technique called voltage-based fault injection, he was able to jailbreak the thing. Voltage-based fault injection, otherwise known as glitching, basically means removing power from the device for a very minuscule amount of time, which allows you to skip certain instructions. By essentially brute forcing and skipping random sections of code, you're eventually able to skip the part of code which checks if the debug tools are disabled, and thus access the chip with debug tools enabled and gain unauthorized access to the device's firmware. After successfully hacking the Airtag, he modified the code and turned an Airtag into a dedicated Rick-rolling NFC tag, because why not? His video with a full explanation will be linked below. Whilst the race to vaccinate everyone rages on, the dark web is cashing in on the situation, as it is now possible to purchase vaccines on the dark web, along with phony proof of vaccination papers, all in exchange for Bitcoin. In one instance, a seller is offering 10 doses of the Moderna vaccine for $2,000. But how do you know you're actually getting a real vaccine and not a vial of cat piss? You don't. That's the beauty of the dark web. Some doctor could be pilfering legit supplies, or some guy is just urinating into bottles. You just don't know. You've been able to buy these wares on dodgy sites for a few months now, though interestingly dark web sales of vaccines have decreased in recent weeks in favour of sales of bogus vaccine certificates. Probably because in Western countries at least, it's really not that hard to get a legit vaccine if you're in a high risk group. But given lockdowns are easing up and some countries require vaccine certificates for travel, these documents are becoming more valuable. Speaking of value, Maltronics is a website run by myself where you can find an array of super cool pen testing products. Our gear is used in over 100 countries, and you can get 10% off with code SATANIC. Trusted by hobbyists, pen testers, and educational institutions, you can learn more at maltronics.com. If you want to see more of this kind of video, make sure to let me know in those comments and turn on those sub notifications so you don't miss any new hacking news. For behind the scenes footage, do follow me on the Instagrams. As always, sources will be linked in the description. Stay tuned for more hacking videos, and have a good one.